March 18th, 2013, the history of the Clairton area at Clairton City Hall. March 18th, 2013, the history of the Clairton area at the Clairton City Hall.
Good evening. I would like to thank all of you for coming. I hope you enjoy this evening. This is our second one of Clairton History Night. Tom Barrett was instrumental in getting this one moving. After we had the first one, we had been asked to have another one, and we stuck busy with other things until Tom put a little bug in my ear, so we thank you, Tom. For you that don't know, we have the restrooms right outside this building. To the right is to the men's, and to the left is the ladies. We also have water for you, if you would like. I may get a little hot in here, I'm going to turn the heat down, but we have bottles of water back there if anybody would like some water. So on. I want to thank Joy Schmidt, our speaker, a local historian. She's a fifth-generation Clairtonian, and she's the president of the West Jefferson Hills Historical Society. I want to thank Ken Barnett at the last minute to be able to come and video this for us. We had the last night videoed and we never got the copy, so hopefully this one will work for us. I'll introduce myself. I'm Kathy Cashmar. I'm the Councilwoman for Ward 4 and Deputy Mayor of the City of Clairton. The Mayor, Rich Otanzi, apologizes that he could not be here tonight. His niece was getting confirmed, and he thought that he had to be there. We have Mr. Richard Ford, who is council person of Ward 2. He's right here. We thank him for being here. And John Tansey, he's the council person here for Ward 1, which is Wilson. So we'll get started. We'll just let Joyce. I think this is going to be more interactive, that people can start and ask questions, so feel free to ask questions.
I was always told not to start with apology, but I'm going to break the rules because I figure my age I can do that, right? I haven't felt well all week, so I'm a little short of breath. So if you see me sitting down, it's because of that, not because I'm being rude. So please bear with me this one. I jump from one thing to another because I do not like to do talks that are read. So I don't do that, and I might go from 1800s to 1900s, and then I say, oh, I forgot something, and I go back to 1800s. So please bear with me. I'm going to treat you like children. And I'm going to ask you to go back in your mind to this land before we were here. In order to really know a place, you need to know the people that populated this place. So I'm going to take you back to the Ice Age. This was all covered with water. How do I know this? Well, on some shell rock behind Huntington Bank, we dug this, and this is seashells, fossil, on the slate stone. We also have some that are fish, and we have some leaves. This was dug by Bob Brown, and this fossil came from there. After the waters receded and started to melt, just like in any river thing, can they hear me?
Can everybody hear her, or should we use the microphone?
Because I'm going to go back up there after.
Okay? All right.
Okay, and as the water receded, it went down a ridge. This was what we know as 51. So it was the Allegheny Plateau. There was a hill here, and there was a hill here. And then after the water left, the lushness of the land developed. It was almost overly lush. The trees were immense. The first people to populate this area that we can trace back, because there was no written history, were the Mounds Indians. They came from Egypt, over the land bridge from Europe to this continent. They were nomads, and they followed the food. So they followed buffalo or bisons in those days, and maybe even some larger animals than that. How do we know that? Again, there were mounds found in Clairton, off Ravensburg Bridge, one in Large, where the football practice field for TJ is, one in Aliquippa, and one in Peters Township, and I'm sure many, many more. These were excavated in 1932, and different fragments were found. This is not from that time. This is from further ahead, and this was found in 1980, and this was a piece of pottery. It was where a fire was, and it was broken. And in my imagination, as I hold it, I feel like I could smell the burning that came from it. This is proof in case you're just not sure how this occurred. Then the Mounds Indians disappeared. Did they go back to Europe? Did they intermingle with tribes that were coming from South America? Or did they die off? We do not know. But they no longer existed. And then the Red Man was in the area. This was the Iroquois tribe. There was 5 nations, and they met in New York. They had no permanent settlement that we can ascertain in this area. But they traveled through. It's like summer powwows. And there was a very good reason for them not to have a permanent settlement here. It's the same reason why this area was later developed along some other coast. It was, again, I'm going to refer back to those trees. They were the cottonwood trees. Now, I'm going to need a few volunteers here. Fred. Take that in. Okay, Tom. You'll learn to ask me. Get up.
You need me.
Take
Somebody else want to listen.
Let's make as big a circle as we can. Well, we thought we would. Stretch as far as you can. This would be the base of a cottonwood tree that was mature. Very small. They ranged to 30 feet in breadth of the trees. Now that's why population wasn't here. Under those trees, vegetation did not grow. There were no small animals. There were no plants of any kind. Now the Indians dealt with this by cut and burn. So they would cut around the trunk of that tree, put bear grease, and then light it. It would burn for about a year, and then they would be able to fell it. Now, what they did with that, they would take one tree and make a whole canoe. They would burn this out, and 30 rays would be in this canoe. 30. You have to let your mind go to that extreme. There's a story that a squirrel could jump from the state of New York, as we know today, through Pennsylvania, clear into Virginia without touching the ground. From tree to tree to tree. And if you've been in the woods lately around here, you do know that the trees have vines. They go from tree to tree. So between the vines and the trees, this made this area not settlable for a while. And that's why the Indians didn't even stay here long.
Can you give some dates?
Pardon me?
Can you give me some dates on when you're talking about?
Well, I have all these dates here, but I didn't want to memorize them. You're going to, you'll be able to look at them if you want to. When we talk about dates, though, we're talking like the Mound Indians was prehistoric time.
Okay.
Okay, and when we're talking about the Red Man here, we're talking probably about the 15th century as it worked out. Now, they had crops that they did grow then, and they helped the white man survive. They grew what they called the Three Sisters, and that was corn and squash, you know, I have a bag here somewhere, but beans. They would make a mound, they would fertilize it with fish heads, then they would plant the corn, and then the beans and the squash would be at the base and wrap around. It was a very efficient way. The water would run down the gullies between, and it would water itself. So we really learned from the Red Man. The first European settlers that came, I shouldn't call them settlers, that came through this area were when I say to the children, I say this is a coonskin cap from Davy Crockett. They look at me like, oh, Davy Crockett, who's Davy Crockett? But you know who they were, by the trappers. And they would trap the furs, trap the animals. They would take the fur off. They would put them on flatboats and put this down Peters Creek and Lewis Run to the Monongahela River, which in Indian terms is the river of muddy banks, to the Ohio, to the Mississippi, to the Gulf of Mexico, and to Europe. Now the Indians got along in general with most of the French trappers because they did not want their land. They didn't want this land that belonged to us. They just wanted to pass through. But when the English came, they wanted the land. They wanted to deal with the land. They wanted to own the land. Now we'll go over next. I'll give you some years, okay? In the early 1700s, when the English were coming to this area, they were forbidden to own the land. They were to wait till 1863 under William Penn before they could own land. Now, William Penn was an extremely honorable man, and when he made treaties with the Indians used the wampum belt as their contract. And this wampum would be made into this belt, and they wear it around the waist here. Okay, who took my wampum? I really wanted that money, right? The wampum belts. And William Penn still felt he needed to pay the Indians for the land, even though they said it didn't have to be. I have a picture here of the purse, the beaded purse that was traded for the area near Chambers Farm. This is a wonderful, made from wampum. It is in Carnegie Library in their section of the museum. Picture of the wampum belt. Oh, here we go. Okay. The Ebner family that bought this property. Now, when you're going up Cold Valley Road to where we have blue roofed medical building, it's right past there. You go back in Chambers Lane and had a beautiful home. Dr. Chambers, who was a doctor in the area, lived in it. And when the house burned down, the house was when they burned fell to the foundation. And we had a group of people that went up and dug into this foundation and found so many bottles and pottery shards. At the time Fred and I got there, there was just a mess left. There wasn't much to pick up. But I saw this. Oh, I would have loved to have it for Jefferson Township. Now you say, you're supposed to be talking about Clairton. Well, you were Jefferson Township, so understand this. And he felt, rightfully so, that it belonged somewhere where more people could see it. And so that's where this is located. The problem I have with Carnegie Museum is that they do not have enough staff, and they have storage rooms. And when you donate something, it's placed in the storage room, and you would know that from the Heritage Center. And if you don't have enough staff to work with it, it never leaves that storage center. And that's sad. So think about that when you have artifacts in that way. Again, if you've looked at this table, we all know Chuck Stott, a teacher from our area. This was found on his property, and when they were plowing, and this is to mark that will smash the corn, and we know that. Many arrowheads in the area. Down along Peters Creek, again, proof of these tribes that lived here. The Iroquois, the Delaware, the Mingo, the Mohawk tribe. Now, I made a mistake, a very bad mistake, and called this an arrowhead. And I said, well, this couldn't possibly be an arrowhead. If this was put at the end of an arrow, it would be shot and go down. This is a spearhead. So I corrected myself on that. And same with this. Anything that's too heavy can't be put at the end. All these were found. Peters Creek area flowing down into Wilson. And this is what we would call a peace pipe. This is a clay pipe, and it wasn't always as small, but the Indians were very clean and sanitary. If I took a puff, then I'd give it to him. He would break off a piece before he took a puff. And this was a real fine. This was up on Chambers Farm. This was fine. And then again, proof that the French were here, and this is a Marchand pipe. Stick there. And what they burned in there was what? Yeah, corn silk dry. And even young boys of my age wouldn't smoke. And stay until tobacco was part of it. Then we found musket balls that were either from Revolutionary War or the War of 1812. This is all proof I'm showing. This would have been, I think, like a necklace kind of thing. There's a hole in there, we cut through. So they like to be decorative too. Now let's leave the Indians, leave the trappers, and talk about those white people that came. Many of them lived along the coast. And it was too crowded in Philadelphia. Crossed those Allegheny Mountains. Now, Iowa Conestoga wagon route was not used for that. It was more of a farm wagon they would come by. And I know the relatives in our family, the Stokes family, Mary Stokes did in history, told about the family coming and then taking the wagon apart and using it as a three-sided shelter until they had enough funds or purpose to build a bigger home in that way, and then they started a store for that. Many came in that way. And then big tracts of farm. Now, you all know the names for Cannondale. This was 1783. John Wormley, which was 1822. That was later. Then the St. Clair, 1788. And the fourth tract that was surveyed in this area was John King in 1783, and then John McElhenney later than that. And these are big farms. These were 350 acres, 400 acres. In fact, we at Jefferson, in our council chambers, have the sheepskin deed that was Zadig Wright's claim to this property. And this was 1754. Now, this was sealed under Virginia, because this was Virginia, this was not Pennsylvania. And then he had to reapply, and it would be sealed then under Pennsylvania. When we found this, it was so exciting, we sent it somewhere to have it freshened up and moistured and put behind a glass that kept it. So it's a treasure that we feel was really wonderful. It was found in someone's attic, and then you historians may know of John Thatcher, who was a great historian. But he used to play a game between Pleasant Hills Library and Jefferson Library. When he got angry at me, he would give it to Pleasant Hills. When he got angry at Pleasant Hills, he would give it back to Jefferson. And then our chief of police, Jack Maple, for some reason got it. I never found out why. And fortunately, he said to me, "Hey, Joyce, I'm retired. Do you want this?" I said, "Oh, what?" You know. And I saw it. It was marvelous. I can't even explain the joy I felt at this. And that's part of our historical society. Now, when I say to you Jefferson Township, before you were Jefferson Township, you were Mifflin Township in 1760. Then, again, politically, politicians and guidance will know this, the people were having trouble going to the polling places. It was too far in West Mifflin to go. Then they created Jefferson Township. Jefferson Township, upon its creation, had what we now know as Clairton, West Elizabeth, parts of West Mifflin, parts of Stoughton, Baldwin, and South Park. It was very huge. And then Clairton was the first section to pull away from Jefferson Township. But let's backtrack again. We have these 4 tracts that were owned by these farmers. That's all we had in this area. The village, wasn't even large enough to be considered a village. It was a hamlet. The largest village in the area was Coal Valley, because they had a post office, Cash Jackson. They had more than 10 families. You said, what have to do with 10 families? Well, under the law, if you had more than 10 families, you had to start a school. Now, this school might be in a home. Over in Elizabeth, the Walker home was used for a long time in that area. The schoolmaster would come with one of the families over those Allegheny mountains, and then each of you would take turns and have them in your home and feed them, care for them, while he started to establish a school. The first school of any importance then was Coal Valley School. 1 room, some tell me, others tell me 2. I don't know. Any of you information on that? Was it 1 or 2? 1 or 2. Okay, we'll see. Now, I do a little skit about that because my mother told me that when you went to school, the first thing that happened was one of the boys was chosen to go get some water. Now, he could go to a nearby stream, or he could go to a nearby farm. But if you know Coal Valley, the way the creek runs down beside it, he went to the stream. So many times there were frogs and other things in it. And then this ladle, which is an original from Coal Valley School, was used and passed on. You want a drink? You want a drink? You want a drink? Now, this wasn't too sanitary, but they got along. My mother tells the story that no one in that school, at the end of their education, couldn't read. They all were able to read, and they all were able to get along with one teacher, because they had from 1st to 6th grade, and if you were a 6th grade pre-lit teacher, student, and then you would help the other children under you. And it worked out very well. This is also a bell from that school. School at that time was 8 hours a day. sometimes 6 days a week. But then they were left out very early to help the crops be planted, and then in the fall to harvest the crops. So for 100 years, this was farmland. And then the marvelous thing of black gold was found. Now, black gold was coal. But also along with coal was clay and shell. It was uncovered in this area. This brought the workers to Coal Valley, Frostburg, which is where we're going into West Elizabeth, Peters Creek, Wilson, and Blair. In 1890, the coal companies of Blackburn and John O'Neill began operations. They would mine the coal, it would be shipped to a tipple along the river, and then put into barges or flatboats at that time. In Coal Valley, the mine was so large that they had a narrow track railroad that was used to bring the steel down. In Clairton, up near where the old Pine Run Methodist Church was, there was a tipple, and coal was brought there. And then to show the ingenuity of the people that settled in this area, there was a Conley, a Thomas Conley, and he was the one that was in charge of the coal that was brought down by the river. And then they had what they called slack coal. Slack coal was garbage. It had no use. And he thought there has to be some use for this. And so he washed it. He had it in piles on both sides of the river. He put sand on it, and he burned it. And this was the first coke from the area. I think that's pretty great. And then he was hired to make what they call a plank road from Whitehall to Pittsburgh. The plank road served, because it was months and it was very hard to have transportation back and forth. So he did that as a self-serving thing, but it worked out. Again, ingenuity. Non-educated people that came here and made this land. And now we know that U.S. Steel was known for years as the coke-producing capital of the world, not just of Jefferson Township or Pennsylvania, United States, of the world. And even now, it is one of them. But what has happened is that India and China have now reserved for #1 place. And things have changed. The story is told to me by one of the U.S. Steel officials that if the Twin Towers, well, this is a big guess, but had been built with U.S. steel, it might not have fallen. It was built with Chinese steel. And we were shaking your head. The regulations are not strong enough on that rules that says it has to be a certain grade. Was this true? Well, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if it was or not. So then you can see by these companies, now we're not going to talk about steel yet, but the coal was the main thing. And then people started to move in the area because it took men to work in these coal mines. The patch was set up in large. I don't know if you ever think Patch No. 9 Coal Company. There was a church. There was a dance hall. How many homes? 100 and some homes. All this in a small community, all because of coal. Clairton was the same way. And then the brickyard came into existence, the Chambers Brickyard. And this, again, was bricks that would be used in the coal mines, would also be used to build some of the homes in the area. The growth of industry spread. Then there was the Campbell Glass House, which made windows for these. Then the famous Mendelssohn Piano Company. That was 1889. The area's first church, I'm proud to say, was Pine Run Church. And it was established in, people help me, what's our first church established in? 1854? Okay, 1854, the first church. And many churches followed. Now, we had a circuit minister that would come from one area to the other, Peaceport, Elizabeth, and then into Clairton. The Peters Creek Cemetery, which was started, of course, some of your famous ancestors are buried there. Oh, I have 1856. Oh, that was incorrect. We'll change that. The first post office was in Coal Valley. The first whiskey was made even earlier than that. And this was a large distillery in Large. And this was made by Samuel C. Large. Again, we're going to talk about the word world. This was the finest rye whiskey in the world. It won as a top whiskey in the 1900 World's Fair in Paris because rye grew so well in this area. That was part of the crops that was very famous in this area. Now the farmers did not have the funds nor the wherewithal to send this rye over the Allegheny Mountains, and that's why they started to distill the whiskey and send it as whiskey in barrels. Now this made the first uprising in this area then against the federal government because during the Whiskey Rebellion they wanted a tax on this whiskey. Well, that was all fine and good, but these people had no money. Plus the tax was on how much your still would produce. If it would produce 40 gallons of whiskey, you were charged on 40 gallons. You might only sell 10, but you were charged for the 40, and they revolted. The federal government sent approximately 2,000 troops here. They were housed where Loeb's Cemetery is today, in the Loeb's Courthouse, and they were just waiting for us to defy them. We did not, but most of them died. They died from smallpox. And if you go to the Loeb Cemetery today, you'll see a sign that denotes this, the mass graves, that was all part of that. And the government finally gave up. They thought these people were just too contrary. Let me tell you how contrary we were. When we were trying to decide whether this was Pennsylvania or Virginia, and the people were fighting back and forth, people in the government, we said, forget it. If you don't make a decision soon, we have a petition drafted, and we will make this the 14th State of the Union, West Sylvania. So they knew who they were dealing with. So that Scotch, and that Irish, and that Welsh, and that Slovak, and Hungarian, and English, all were strong people who were willing to fight for what they wanted. Then in the 1900s, we had an amusement park. We had Central Park. And it had a dance hall, it had a merry-go-round, picnic pavilion, and people would come by steamship from Pittsburgh to vacation here because of the clean water and fresh air. And the ladies worked hard. We all know that. Ladies still work hard today. The irons they carried, the work they did on the farm. But they still had enough charm to dress beautifully. Handmade clothes. This is from the Bedell family, from the 1800s. This is the wedding gown. All handmade. Purse. To show you that these people have a social life. They probably went to Central Park. Central Park was something to be so proud of. And again, that brought
Where was it?
Pardon me?
Where was Central Park?
Central Park was down in Blair.
Okay.
Across from where the railroad station is, or down in through that way. Am I correct in that? Okay. Okay, ladies. Here. We meaning the Historical Society, 3 footlockers the size of these tables and this high from this gentleman that married one of the Bedell ladies later in life and said that these clothes belonged back in her community. So when my husband and I went to pick them up at the nursing home, a lady was very ill and they said, we have some things for you. No, I thought maybe a few pictures or something. Well, when I saw these 3 chests of gorgeous things, and he said, well, we want it back in her community. Now, one of the Bedell sisters taught in Clairton. I don't know if that name ever rings a bell with you. The house that they lived in is still up in the patch area. If you go up to fish or anything, you go across a little bridge. And it's been purchased by the Caligiuri family. And it has some beautiful things around it, plus a cemetery there. Okay, we have now coal. We have the Central Park. So when does steel come into it? Well, then comes in the picture Carnegie and Frick. When the mill of crucible steel first came into existence, they had open hearth furnaces. They named them the St. Clair Furnace Company. A blooming and a billet mill was built, and it was named the St. Clair Steel Company. In 1902, hands changed again, and it became Carnegie Steel Company, which you're probably more familiar with, later to the United States Steel Corporation. During that time, 30,000 to 33,000 tons of coal was reduced to coke daily in those days. The mill employed approximately 100,000 people. 100,000 people. Now, Clairton Mill, Urban Works, and what's the one over at Hampstead? Employ 6,000. It shows you the reduction. And then the people came in the area. Now, I did some interviewing during this time with some families from Clairton. Bernardo was one of them. Ruth Ulmer, Lois Winger were telling me about some of those early days and the marvelous stores that were here. How about you adding to that? What were some of the stores that were in Clairton? I know there was Isley's. There was a 5 and 10. There were jewelry stores, fruit markets. What else?
The Moradas.
There was car dealerships. In fact, the Lincoln Mercury, when they were opening, had Ed Sullivan come here for the grand opening. And that's part of the history. So we really, in the Blair area, they had the Downbeat Club. What was it called before that, Linda? You told me.
Well, there was another one called the Broadway.
The Broadway. And they had jazz artists from all over the United States come here. This was the place to be. I'm sure you can name more and more. Railroad came through here. Virginia Charleston Railroad ran daily, sometimes 2 times a day. They had a trolley company that went from West Elizabeth to Clairton to McKeesport. Mr. Bernardo told me that his father in 1920 had a cab company. And yes, there was even a Chinese laundry. Even a Chinese laundry. It's hard for me to imagine that Clairton of that day. The area grew, and many again complained that we didn't want to be part, we meaning Clairton, did not want to be part of Jefferson Township. So the borough of Clairton was erected in 1903. The boroughs of Clairton, Wilson, and Blair in 1920 became a third-class city of Clairton. The only 2 that were larger than Clairton in this area was McKeesport and Duquesne. And again, they were because of mills. So we owe a lot, I think, to the mills. Then we talk about the battle between Carnegie and Frick. In fact, a wonderful book is Meet You in Hell. And it talks about the story of what they did to the people to make this the company it was and the profits they had. Truthfully, they made a great profit because they had the workers work long hours for little money. During the Depression, a lady from my church told me that her father made $7.50 for 2 weeks' work. And even in that day, it was a very small amount. But then she told me the same story, that she would go down to Cash Jackson's store with a quarter and buy a loaf of bread, a quart of milk, and a half a pound of bologna. So I guess if you stretch it that way. Frick also bought the land where the amusement park was. And he said he was going to make a city farm. Excuse me a minute. Only water. He was making a city farm there. But this is how politics worked. He bought the land, and I'm going to make up this figure. I have no idea what the cost is. I don't know if you from the Heritage House know where you can get cost or things. I don't know how it was. But let's say $1,000. He did not plan to make a city farm there. He sold it to the city. He took it from the city, paid him $1,000, and then he sold it to Pittsburgh itself for like $3,000. And then when he didn't use it, he said to Clairton area, he said, "You want to buy it back? Okay, it'll be $5,000. So he ripped off the people right down the line. But that is how it was. The Marine Ways, this part of the area, from the Marine Ways up and the mill, populated both sides of that river. So that river that was known by Indian name of Muddy Banks became just a little worse. I remember going boating at Coal Valley and having a white bathing suit and come out of the water with an oil slick around. But that's the price of industry. And then I see we have a couple African Americans here. Do you know how your people came here? During the time of the mills, when the blast furnaces were, the men here couldn't work. And in them. Even the men that were very strong coal workers could not do it. And so they sent a representative to the South, like an employment man, and he would encourage the men to sign up. They brought the railroad train to this area. They provided homes for them and had them work in the mills. Not treating them very fair, but they did. And then the families followed later. And the government stepped in. Yes?
I want to ask, now on State Street, was that mostly African American within their own city, that whole area?
In the Blair area, yes. It was almost all
Blair,
African Americans.
All that whole street right in front of the mill.
And
That
what
was-
we know is Lincoln Way now, where homes clear back in there. Now the steel company built the homes.
Okay.
They let the workers live in it, but not for free. They would take from their pay the amount for the rent, whatever they said that to be. Plus they would take from the company store, and the men brought very little money home. So even if they wanted to leave, there was no possibility.
But I'm asking, did they have like their own storage? Because I can remember going to Dr. Session,
Okay.
and we were very good. We would go to the corner drugstore, and my mother would get us a milkshake. And it was, I remember that, and I remember it was a Cleaners. But my mom told me back before I was, born and all that, whole street was lined up with different businesses owned by African Americans
Yes, I'm
too.
sure. Oh,
On State
I
Street.
have a 2-page list of the stores that were in
Right.
Clairton.
So that's where most of the African,
Right.
that's what I'm asking, is that where most African Americans lived?
But I think further up than that. I think what we
Okay.
call the Blair area now. Now, I'm not real sure. Again, most of the stories I get from this is personal comments of people when I interview, and they tell me these things and that. So they really couldn't leave the area. But it wasn't just the African Americans that were prejudiced against. If you had a Slovak name, you would change it to Smith. Or, Tom, you know this from names that are changed, and that was done so they could anglize their names. Because both the black man and the poor white were not permitted to be promoted. And they could not run machinery. And during World War II, when if you did a certain job, you could be excused from going to the military. If you were African American, that didn't work. So there were a lot of prejudice and things in that way. The Union developed strongly in Clairton. There's theories, and if you want to read some wonderful books, that I guess I'm publicizing this, is my cousin Joni Angelo that wrote a series of the Monongahela Chronicles. And although they're fictionized, they're the story of this area with true facts in them, of the people, and she has a whole section on the unions. But then the unions became powerful, and steel became powerful, and the worker was lost somewhere in that realm. I know when I go down through Southside, and I see the large buildings for the electrical engineers and others, I think, but what are your men making now? Are they working? And that's the bottom line. I don't know the answer to that. I'm sure you don't either. Productions in the Clairton mills during their heyday in the 50s and 60s was increased by 800,000. 800% of, I said 800% increase from the steel. And this was also after the war, because of the buildings that needed to be built at this time. Okay. Now we know that the newspapers told us last year, the year before, that there were going to be 2 new coke ovens opened in the Clairton mill. Now it's down to 1. Am I correct? Now they're only going to do 1. But what the company did at that time was that the coke was the dirtiest thing to really work with. And in the air and in the waters it was polluted. But later down the line, men decided how they could put a rubber gasket around these doors and somehow seal it. And now the coke plant in Clairton is one of the cleanest in the nation. So that's something to be proud of. The schools in Clairton. The school started with the small elementary schools and then the high school. And one of the ladies was asking me something about football. Well, I'm not really in, sorry Tom, I'm not really in sports, but I don't do a lot of research on that. But we know how grand Clairton has been in these last couple of years. But even in the day when I went to Clairton High School, it was wonderful because we had pep rallies beforehand. When they won the championship, we had the day off from school. It was an exciting time. And after I went to Thomas Jefferson, because I was raised in Coal Valley, and our school was done, I used to lie when someone asked me what school I went to. I said, Clairton, because TJ didn't win anything. Anything. No, times have changed. History works like a pendulum. It goes, you know, you have to watch what you say, because you might be up here one day, and then you're down here. We in Jefferson always say that Pleasant Hills, you know, they broke from Jefferson because they said they were embarrassed with our chickens and our outhouses. And then when the water line went in and they said that they were going to pay all that for those farmers, and now, who's the growing community? Interesting. Real estate man? Jefferson, right? So we always should watch what we say in that line. What's the outlook for Clairton? What do you hope as the citizens of Clairton? What do you hope for Clairton to become? You want the vibrant city it once was? What is needed to do that? Personally, I think some industries. I think it isn't parks. And you know, they're putting, like in McKee Sports House, they put a park in. Well, the people want work. They want work, they want manufacturers. We still have the river, which is the best means of transportation there is. The cheapest, I believe, is to use barges rather than trucks to haul things or trains. We have the river. We have the natural resources. We could get the people. They would come when the work came. So maybe the goal should be to go out there and beat industry's door. I don't know. History shows that industry brings people. And that's probably the most important thing. History also shows that for your young people, when you're worried about them going astray, if they have pride in where they come from, or if they have pride in their families, that stops a lot of misbehavior. My mother was always saying, do not embarrass our name, right? I don't know what I was supposed to not do, but don't embarrass the name. And when I talk about fourth and fifth generation, talking about working people, people who had calluses on their hands and dirt under their fingernails, but they raised their children to go on to college, to become teachers and doctors and engineers, but they still were proud of the land. They always say, don't forget where you came from. And I always think that about Clairton. I'm proud to say Clairton was my address. I love Jefferson Hills, but Clairton was my address. And that's who gave me the background to who I am. I thought we'd open this up now, to you. Maybe what are your memories of Clairton? How about the shows? Ladies, you can tell me the shows.
3 in Clairton and 1 in Wilson, 1 in Blair, and 3 up on the north.
Right, yes. 5. Was it 2 in Wilson?
1 in Wilson, 1 in Blair, 3 on the road.
Capital State Colonial.
Drugstores. Many drugstores.
You had D-Bones, you had Stokes, Johnson's, Walker's.
And then the touching point today, how about grocery stores?
Yeah, about 50.
Grocery store. How many was here before? Why are they?
Last time we had this meeting, 1947, there was 14 new car dealerships. The gentleman in the back corrected me. He said it was 16. And he went through 16 brand new cars, not used cars, new cars.
And Clairton was always known for its music also. The competition that would be involved with them.
We had a lot of car dealerships.
That's what he was saying. How many? Like 15. And doctors. You mentioned Dr. Session. I remember hearing. Dr. Heinrich. Name some others.
Dragon.
Right.
Daddy was the best doctor.
Walker. Yeah.
I always feel when I go into the Wisnick's office, and it used to be Rascati's, now it shows, but I'm coming home. They treat you that way. They treat you at the clothing stores in Clairton. Scabbards. Ladies scabbards used to call and say to me, hey Joyce, I got some long dresses there because I was cold and needed that weather. Does that happen? Does Penny's ever call me and say? I don't think so. Yes?
Dr. Riscati delivered 3 of my kids. In fact, he even took My tonsils out down at, where Dr. Sheldon has his dentist. He took my tonsils out.
In the office, right?
Right in the
That's
office.
how mine, in the office.
You know what he charged me for delivery? $65. $65 to deliver the babies.
Yes?
I think Friday night football's big now. There used to be 10,000 people in that stadium with the band marched from the high school up to Miller Avenue. Both sides of the street were lined with people marching right up with the band. They had seats in the end zones. They don't have them there anymore.
And I remember, they had honey bears. We still have the honey bears. Oh, they were short.
You're talking about the honey bears. I taught here from 65 to 72. Benny Benack. Benny Benack was the stronghold. He started the first jazz band. Between 65 and 68, 69, our athletic teams weren't that good. There were more music scholarships coming out of Clairton than there were all the sports combined. Benny did something to be a honey bear. To be a honey bear that you can't get away with that. He built a frame. He built a frame where he had a girl walk through it, and he part of her body touched it. She was not a honey bear.
This isn't necessarily.
God had put all the parts in the right places and in the right dimensions, and he got away with it.
This isn't necessarily Clairton, but a friend of mine during World War II was in the Black Forest in Germany. Came across a Kennywood sign up on the tree.
I still think Kenny was a wonderful park. I was sad when the Spanish flooded. Really, Black Forest, that's where my husband grew up.
We had a lot of good bakeries too. We had
Oh,
Grizzlies
yes.
bakeries, and during the holidays, you couldn't get into Grizzlies. I mean, the line was all the way out.
Smell was all
And
the
you
way
do
down.
have a post office. Jefferson has been fighting for a post office forever. So there's good memories. Now, what do you think if there were some youth here tonight? What do you think they would be saying to us? You know, the old people, you always keep going back. I think we do need to change. We need to have a vision for them. We need to give that to them. I don't know the secret. All I know that in our school system, you have what? You have computers now, and you have the videos. In fact, a man from the newspaper said to me, "Do you use a PowerPoint?" I said, no. Every time I went to a PowerPoint presentation, they have trouble setting it up. It doesn't work. It shuts off now. And we have all these things in our school system, as I know you do. But when we have someone who cannot read, we call Louise Biddle, who is what? Close to 90. And she teaches them, and they read. Something missing there. Yes, you want to say something?
Yeah, the young people in this town, they have no place to go.
No, they don't.
Before they used to have dances for the kids, a little bit, but there's nothing for them.
That's a very good point. I always think that when people are complaining about motorbikes and quads and things, what do you want the kids to do? Where do you want them to go? Isn't it better to hear the noise down in the gully than have them going? But that's my opinion. Now, you mentioned about dates. Are there any prevalent dates you think we should talk about?
No, I'm just listening to what you were talking about, the big trees and all that.
Very early. I think that's a very impressive thing, and that's why I use that demonstration with children, because they can't visualize that. This was all virgin wood, and that's why it was called Penn's Woods. Well, I've kind of run out of steam, so I thank you for being such a wonderful audience. Oh, your question?
Yeah. Whenever I went to school, I graduated in 1949. Clairton was the third highest graded school in Allegheny County when I went to it. And we had old teachers like Rotilio Rotilli, that was our band director, that just had hundreds of kids, and now they have, I think, 13 in their band.
Well, how about my Aunt Mary Stokes, Whispering Mary?
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Okay. She kept control.
My grandfather and his wife came over to visit me
and they settled in the patch. My mother went to school in the patch.
Okay.
Then they moved from the patch to Clairton.
Number 7, and many people that,
Number
in fact,
7, yeah.
if you remember from U.S. Steel, there was a chairman of the board, Riley was his last name.
Yeah,
He was born and raised in Patch.
right.
So humble beginnings, yes?
I think also Clairton Park was donated, I believe, by a family.
Yes.
The ground was given to the
Oh,
city.
that's what I forgot.
And the swimming pool, I don't know exactly when it was built.
I forgot, we all know about Woodland Terrace, but this was new to me. This was called Melbourne Village. And I did not hear the soldiers, United States Army, built these barracks for the soldiers when they came home, and so then it was rented to the people, and this was a kitchen in one of them. Doesn't look too bad, but I talked to Joan Gregory, who lived in it, said it was bad. She couldn't wait to get out of it, but imagine that.
They were right where I lived
As I
in.
say, and where the monument is there is,
That is my picture of where I lived in that house.
okay,
That's my house.
there's a monument to a World War II soldier
Yes.
for all his decorative things that he did there. What's write that say?
Gentleman back here mentioned our swimming pool. Let me see a show of hands. How many of you went to the junior high, 5th Street Junior High? And how many of you had to take swimming in 7th and 8th grade? I tell people this and they call me a liar. Boys have to take swimming in the nude. No suits, in the nude. But the girls had to do it and use tank tops, and they told us because of the filter system. It's not fair. But I tell people that, they say no way. My wife to this day hasn't seen it.
Sir, do you have any idea why was the reasoning for this?
Pardon me?
Why?
I was a kid. I don't.
They did the same thing at the YMCA.
It's supposing for health
And
reasons.
I will never forget Ed Porter. If you misbehave, I saw him bend the kid over the diving board, dip the paddle in the water, and crack his backside. If he misbehaved. So guess what? You don't misbehave.
He had a shop class build his house. I remember that well.
They're on top. You have to take a shower.
You were talking about that village, the homes with the glass, they had the same type village down where Blair baseball field is. The same village, all the way back to
Same
there.
kind of thing, what were they built by the military, like a barracks style?
Yeah, they were very.
Now, what I couldn't find out, I asked people if they knew what the rent was there. I don't know.
$26.
$26.
$26 we paid for Malmedy Village a month.
26, okay, good, that's good to know, yes.
Those Malmedy Village homes were built after the Second World War
Yes.
for the military people coming back from the war.
Right, and that was called Reynolds Barracks.
And they were supposed to be only for like a year, and they lasted, what, how long?
And then the Wilson Company, John Wilson and his 2 sons built all the homes on Carnegie Avenue. Now again, U.S. Steel owned a majority of these, and were renting them out to the people until the government stepped in again and said, you can't do that. You can't do that to people with demanding. So there was some protection there.
I heard, I thought Mendelssohn Avenue was an address, and Peters Creek was an address.
Blair Station.
Yes.
Mendelssohn
Yes,
Station.
you're right.
Yeah.
We even had a train station in Wilson.
Right, a train station.
Got on the train.
2 stops a day. Even in my early time going into Pittsburgh, I would go. This has been, yes.
About Malmedy Village, a lot of people lived there, but we had a real famous fire there. I believe the whole family perished in a fire. And I think shortly after that, maybe it was the
4 kids.
How?
the Powell family. It was a horrendous thing in the town at that time.
That fire, we had, one of our firemen was Herbie Johnson.
Yes, yes.
He went in and tried to save these kids without a gas mask. 6 months later, he was dead because he inhaled all those fumes, and it just burnt his. 6 months he was dead, but he couldn't save those kids.
There's some wonderful stories. Yes, Tom?
strong rumor had it that when United States Steel came in and they started producing, Clairton started the boom. Their philosophy was, in order to have a wonderful community, you have to have good recreation. That's how they built the park. You have to have wonderful schools. So we have a tremendous school system. And our park today is as fine as anything. The big lodge there, and the one in Renzi and McKeesport, from what I understand, there's German architecture to it. Okay? There's German architecture that they patterned these two buildings from. We got a great park.
I went down to the Wilson Civic Center to take a picture of the vault doors, and the lady there was telling me, Martha, that when you come over Glassbrook Bridge, look at that bank building, how beautiful it is. Well, I never did. All these years, I've never done that. The other day, we were going over in that area, and I said to my husband, I have to look at that. And it is true. The architecture at the top of the building is gorgeous. I asked Spence if he knew what the date was. He was wondering maybe he could find it out. It was always the First National Bank, correct? Was it anything else previous to that?
Down here was Wilson Branch.
Wilson Branch.
Yeah. We have First National on the hill.
Yeah, wait.
It's something national bank, picture over here.
Bring the African Americans here to work. Jobs that the other men didn't do. So who knows? Thank you ever so much.
One more question.
Keep your pride going. One more question.
One more question. In Clairton's heyday, late 50s, early 60s, I would assume everyone would say it was Clairton's heyday. Why did Jefferson and Pleasant Hills want to break away from Clairton School District?
Because they created West Jefferson Hills, which was Jefferson, Pleasant Hills, and West Elizabeth.
But why? If Clairton School District was so good, and it was, we'll all agree, in the 50s, early 60s, Clairton was the best. Why did they want to break away?
Well, Rainbow
I
did
think
the
at
same.
that
Part of the
time,
kids were
Clairton
over there too.
School was holding too many students. Because they have West Jefferson and West Elizabeth, and I think it's overcrowded at that time.
But Clairton also, when she mentioned about one of the top schools, you could get into any college graduating from Clairton without taking any school exams or anything. And there was a day that at Jefferson you could do that, but not now.
The surrounding school districts of Clairton, they all had their own elementary buildings.
Right.
It was the secondary schools that came to Clairton. There was Snowden, which is part of South Park now, West Mifflin, Elizabeth Ford, TJ.
We had 7 elementary, 1-room schools in Jefferson, combined to make Roosevelt.
Yeah. Clairton was the focal point for the secondary education, not the elementary.
So good question, thank you. Okay, I said, let's do that. Thank you for listening.
I want to thank Joyce for coming, even though she's not up to par. We appreciate this. If you want to stay and talk among each other about old times and what you remember, please, you're in no hurry to leave, okay? Just stay here. One thing I forgot to mention in the beginning, Penn State University had a program that some students worked on in the fall to follow the city and the football team. And they are looking for pictures of the business district up here on the hill or down in Wilson from the 50s, 60s, and 70s. I can't seem to find anything. Oh no, but they want like the street when it's hustle and bustle. And they only need 4 or 5. If anybody has any pictures at all from the St. Clair, Miller Avenue, State Street, anything.
Go over to the bank. I was in there talking to one of the ladies a couple of years ago. She was showing me pictures of the actual construction.
Industrial industry here in town. One thing that we have a problem with is Clairton has no access to the river. U.S. Steel owns all property 3 miles of it. And we have no access to get to it. Earl's another historian that has a lot of good things to say. 1950, the United States Steel was the largest corporation in the world. I'm repeating it because he has a Swiss version.
Now it's not in the top 100.
Now it's not in the top 100.
That's because, in my opinion, we needed steel to win World War II. World War III, the space age is beyond my knowledge. But, and finally, Pittsburgh is the only major metropolitan area in the United States
in the schools.
lost population.
At the time, Clairton was
starting
booming
in 1960
and at capacity.
right through 2000.
Jefferson was growing rapidly. It would have overcrowded the Clairton schools. Clairton School Board says our schools are paid for. Why should we build new schools to accommodate Jefferson? Go build your own schools. So they did. Now the shoe's on the other foot. Building bigger schools. That's why Jefferson had to build their own.
Well, I think they started getting so populated that they needed their own schools.
Yeah, but
they went back to their own schools. They built their own high